It buzzed again, loud and sharp against the quiet kitchen counter, the kind of ringing that made you feel something was wrong. Sarah Blake, standing near the sink, her hands still wet from washing dishes, glanced at it with furrowed brows. "Why is the hospital calling?" she whispered to herself. Her heart felt heavy before she even picked it up. She dried her hands quickly on her jeans and grabbed the phone. Her fingers shook as she pressed the green button to answer. "Hello, Mrs. Blake?" the voice asked. "Yes, this is she. This is Officer Rowley. I'm calling from the highway patrol. There's been an accident." Everything froze. The air, the noise from the backyard, the wind outside the window. Sarah's lips trembled. "Accident? What? Who?" "It's about your husband, James Blake." And in that moment, her world fell apart. James wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the highway. He had gone to pick up a tool from a friend's place. Just a 30-minute drive. But now, the police officer was saying things like head-on collision, no pulse, immediate response, and declared deceased at the scene. Sarah's knees gave out. She dropped to the cold tile floor, the phone still against her ear, but she wasn't hearing anymore. Her daughter, Lily, came running inside from the backyard. "Mom? Mom!" But Sarah couldn't speak. The pain hit like a hammer. James was gone, and he was only 38. The news spread faster than Sarah imagined. One call to her sister, and suddenly the whole town of Maple Heights knew. James Blake, the friendly carpenter, the man who volunteered every Christmas, the one who built birdhouses for the kids at school, was dead. It didn't feel real, not even when the funeral home van pulled into the driveway, not when Sarah had to choose what shirt James would be buried in, not even when the man at the funeral home said, "We can have him buried by tomorrow. It'll be quiet, family only, as you said, tomorrow? So soon?" But Sarah couldn't think straight. Everyone kept saying it would be easier if it was fast. Less pain, less to plan, less to worry about. Her brain was numb. Her body felt like it wasn't hers. So she nodded, yes, tomorrow. That night, Lily lay on the living room couch, crying quietly into a blanket. She was only 12, too young to lose her father. Sarah sat beside her, staring at a picture of James on the wall. His smile was wide and real in that photo. He had been holding up a wooden chair he made for Lily's birthday. She had painted the seat pink. Now, just one day later, he was gone, and by morning, he would be buried. The funeral was quiet, no music, no long speeches, just family and a few close friends. James's mother cried so hard she had to be helped to her seat. His younger brother, Martin, stood stiff with a clenched jaw, refusing to let a single tear fall. And Sarah just held Lily's hand tightly and stared at the coffin like it wasn't real. A few people spoke kind words. A few said prayers. The priest lowered his head and whispered something about life being short, about the soul returning to God. And then it was done. The earth was closed over James Blake, and everyone went home. That night, the house was too quiet. Sarah tried to sleep, but her mind kept racing. She couldn't stop thinking about James, not about the accident, but about how fast everything happened. He was alive, then gone, then buried, all in one day. It didn't feel right. She lay in their bed, unable to rest. The blanket still smelled like him. His toothbrush still sat by the sink. His boots were still at the front door. He hadn't even left a goodbye. She turned on the bedside lamp and reached for her phone. She opened the messages. The last thing James had sent her was a photo of a dog on the road. A scruffy little stray. He'd written, "This guy almost ran in front of my truck. Had to swerve. That was just 2 hours before the accident." She frowned. That didn't make sense. The police had said he hit a light pole on a straight road, but why would he swerve? Was there really a dog? She stared at the photo. The background wasn't the highway. It looked like the woods, a narrow road with trees. Had he taken a different route? Suddenly, she had a strange feeling. Something was off. The next day, Sarah went to the police station. She asked to speak to Officer Rowley. He met her in a small room and offered her coffee. She didn't take it. I just have some questions, she said. He nodded. Of course. I'll try to help. What time did the accident happen? About 6:45 p.m. And where exactly? North Hills Parkway, just past the overpass. She shook her head. James sent me a photo at 5:40. Said he was swerving to avoid a dog, but the place in the photo wasn't North Hills Parkway. It was more rural, wooded, not near the overpass. Officer Rowley looked thoughtful. Sometimes people take different routes. Did anyone check his phone? She asked. We have the phone in evidence, yes. Standard procedure. She leaned forward. I'd like to see it. The officer looked surprised. Mrs. Blake, I understand you're grieving, but the case is closed. There was no foul play, just a tragic accident. I'm not saying someone killed him, she said. I want to understand, the officer sighed. I'll see what I can do. Later that afternoon, Sarah got a call. Officer Rowley agreed to let her look at the phone the next day. She couldn't explain why it mattered so much. Maybe it was just grief. Maybe it was just the way James's last message felt like a clue. Or maybe it was her heart refusing to believe it had ended so fast. She needed to see that phone. She needed to know the truth, because somewhere deep in her bones, she felt something wasn't right. And if James had left her anything, any clue, any message, it was hidden in that phone. That night, Sarah had a strange dream. She saw James standing by the woods. He was calling her name, but his voice was faint, like a whisper on the wind. She tried to run to him, but something pulled her back, a heavy feeling, like chains. He looked at her with sad eyes, and then he said something she couldn't forget. They buried me too soon. She woke up screaming. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the dream. They buried me too soon. The words echoed in her head like a warning. She had never believed in dreams meaning anything, but now, every time she closed her eyes, she saw James standing there, trying to tell her something, trying to reach her from wherever he was. She arrived at the police station early the next morning, dressed in a black coat and boots. Her face looked pale, and the bags under her eyes showed she hadn't slept. Officer Rowley met her at the front desk. I spoke with the medical examiner, he said, walking her to a small room in the back. We've got the phone, but I need to be with you while you go through it. She nodded. He opened a small evidence box and pulled out the phone. James's black Samsung with the cracked corner she always told him to fix. He powered it on. The screen lit up with his familiar wallpaper. A photo of Lily riding her bike for the first time. Sarah stared at it for a long moment. Then, slowly, she opened the gallery. The last photo was the one he had sent her, the scruffy dog on the road with trees all around. But something caught her eye. Just before that photo, there were several short video clips. The last one was only 12 seconds long. She tapped it. The video opened with a shaky image of the road. James's voice could be heard. Some kind of dog, or maybe a coyote. Won't move. Weird little thing. Then there was a noise, not from the animal, but something deeper, a human voice, a whisper. Sarah played it again, this time holding the phone closer to her ear. At the end of the video, just before it cut out, there was a soft sound. It wasn't clear, but it sounded like help. Sarah's blood ran cold. Officer Rowley leaned in, frowning. Play that again. They listened to it 3 times. Could just be static, he said. Road noise. Might not mean anything, but Sarah was sure now. Someone had called out in that video, and James had heard it. Later that day, Sarah drove to the funeral home. She hadn't been able to say goodbye properly. The burial had happened too fast, too quiet. She needed to see James again, to feel some kind of peace. But when she got there, the director met her at the door with a grim expression. I'm sorry, Mrs. Blake, he said softly. We can't allow exhumations without proper authorization. She stared at him. I don't want to exhume him. I just want to ask about the body. About anything. Strange. The director hesitated. Well, he said, choosing his words carefully, there was Something odd, but we didn't mention it. Given the state of grief, what was it? He looked uncomfortable. When we received the body, there were scratches on his arms, deep ones, like he'd been fighting, but the report from the scene didn't mention it. Sarah's heart began to pound. Scratches? You mean defensive wounds? I'm not a doctor, he said quickly. Could have been from branches, but they were fresh. And another thing, his fingernails were dirty, like he'd been digging. Sarah felt dizzy. Digging? The man nodded slowly. It was odd, considering he died in a car crash. His hands didn't look peaceful. A terrible thought entered Sarah's mind. What if James hadn't died on the road? What if he had passed out and then woke up, buried alive? She pressed a hand to her chest. Her breathing grew shallow. I need to speak to the coroner, she whispered. The county coroner's office was in a plain building next to the hospital. It smelled of cleaning chemicals and sadness. Sarah walked in like someone chasing a ghost. She asked for Dr. Levi Sanders, the man who signed James's death certificate. He met her in a quiet office with old furniture and stacks of papers. I reviewed your husband's case, he said, folding his hands. I understand your concerns. You wrote that he was dead at the scene. Yes, Dr. Sanders nodded. That was the report from first responders. Did you examine the body yourself? He hesitated. No, the body was taken straight to the funeral home after being declared deceased. That's common when there's no suspicion of foul play. She leaned forward. But did anyone check his heartbeat with medical equipment? An ECG? Did anyone confirm brain activity? Dr. Sanders's eyes narrowed slightly. No, Mrs. Blake. Paramedics found no pulse. He had multiple head injuries. There was no sign of life. Sarah's voice cracked. What if he was alive? What if the injuries looked worse than they were? He shifted uncomfortably. That's extremely unlikely, but not impossible, she said. There are stories. Cases where people were declared dead too soon, where they woke up in morgues, in coffins. Dr. Sanders didn't speak. Sarah whispered, what if he was breathing, but shallow? What if they missed it? I need to see the body. To answer that, he replied, but he's already buried. There was silence between them. Then Dr. Sanders said quietly, there are rare conditions where signs of life can be hard to detect. Severe trauma can mimic death, but it's rare. Sarah stood. I want the body exhumed. You'll need a court order, he said. That can take time. She turned toward the door, voice trembling. Then I'll get one. That evening, Sarah sat with Lily in the living room. They were quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. Mom? Lily asked softly. Do you think Daddy's in heaven? Sarah looked at her daughter, her innocent face, her big green eyes. I hope so, she said. Lily tilted her head. Sometimes I hear him. In my dreams. He tells me he's not gone, that he's just cold. Sarah froze. Cold, she whispered. Lily nodded, and scared. Sarah pulled Lily into a hug, tears streaming down her face. It was too much, too strange, too real. The next morning, Sarah went to see a lawyer. She explained everything. The rushed burial, the strange video, the scratch marks, the lack of a full autopsy. The lawyer agreed to help her file an emergency petition. Courts don't like exhumations, he warned. But if we present enough evidence, they might allow it. Sarah nodded. I don't care what it takes. While the paperwork was being processed, Sarah visited the crash site. She stood by the side of North Hills Parkway and looked at the spot where James's car had struck the light pole. There were still pieces of glass on the ground. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine it, the crash, the sound, the silence after, and then something caught her eye. A path, just off the road, hidden by trees, was a narrow dirt trail. She followed it. It curved into the woods, quiet and empty. After about 10 minutes, she came to a clearing, and there, lying in the grass, was something that stopped her heart, a brown wallet, James's wallet, still full. Still untouched, she opened it with shaking hands. Inside was his driver's license, and a note folded behind a photo of Lily. She pulled it out slowly. There were only 3 words written, scribbled in panicked handwriting, "I'm still here." Sarah stood frozen in the woods, the note trembling in her hand. "I'm still here." 3 words that didn't make sense unless James had been alive, unless, somehow, after the crash, he had crawled into these woods, dropped his wallet, and tried to leave a sign. The clearing was silent. The wind rustled through the leaves above her, but nothing else moved. She looked around, half expecting him to walk out from behind the trees, but he didn't. James was under the ground, buried, possibly alive when it happened. Sarah stumbled backward and dropped to her knees, clutching the note against her chest. Tears spilled down her face, but her mind was racing. If she had come here a few days ago, if she had followed the clues sooner, would he have been saved? Her breath caught in her throat. She needed answers. She needed to dig him up. Back in town, the court hearing was scheduled quickly. Her lawyer presented the evidence: the unclear crash report, the lack of medical confirmation of death, the scratches, the dirty fingernails, the video, and now the wallet with the note. Sarah stood before the judge with her hands clasped tightly, trying not to shake. "I don't know what happened," she said, "but my husband might have been buried alive. If there's even the smallest chance, I need to know." The courtroom was silent for a long time. Then the judge finally said, "The petition is granted. Exhumation is approved for tomorrow morning." Sarah let out a cry she had been holding in for days. By sunrise, the cemetery was already surrounded by quiet police officers, a few medical examiners, and the funeral director, who now looked ghost pale himself. The grave was marked by a simple headstone: James Blake, 1987-025, beloved husband and father. Sarah stood beside it, arms wrapped around herself as the crew began digging. The sound of the shovel against dirt felt like thunder in her ears. Each scoop brought her closer to the truth and to a fear she couldn't name. What if the coffin was empty? What if the body was mangled beyond recognition? What if he was still alive when they buried him? When the casket was finally lifted out, everyone stepped back. Dr. Levi Sanders put on gloves and slowly opened it. The creak of the hinges echoed through the early morning fog, and then gasps. Everyone stared. James Blake lay inside, but not like a man peacefully at rest. His hands were clenched into fists. His eyes were slightly open. There were scratch marks inside the coffin lid, long, desperate ones, and worst of all, his mouth was open in a silent scream. Sarah dropped to her knees. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Dr. Sanders leaned over the body, checking his limbs, his face, his fingers. "This man was alive when he was buried," he said quietly. "He had oxygen in his lungs, dirt under his nails. He woke up inside this coffin and tried to escape." The funeral director looked like he might faint. One of the officers covered his mouth in shock. Sarah reached into the coffin and took James's cold hand in hers. She had failed him. Everyone had. The story exploded across the news. "Man buried alive in Maple Heights." The headline screamed, "Tragic mistake by first responders. Wife's instinct uncovers terrifying truth." Reporters showed up at Sarah's door. She didn't answer. Lawyers began to call. The hospital issued a statement of sorrow. An investigation. Sarah didn't care about lawsuits. She didn't want money. She wanted James. And now, she couldn't stop asking one question. Why didn't anyone double-check? Why did the world move so quickly to bury him? Dr. Sanders asked Sarah if she wanted an autopsy now. She nodded. When it was done, he called her into his office. "I examined everything," he said. James had a mild head injury from the crash, enough to knock him unconscious but not kill him. But the first responders said no pulse. Sarah said, "They were wrong," he replied. He was in deep shock. His heartbeat was faint, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. Sarah felt sick. "How long do you think he survived?" "Down there?" Dr. Sanders took a deep breath. "Anywhere between 4 to 7 hours." Sarah's heart shattered again. James had been alive, trapped, suffocating, dying in the dark, calling for her, and no one had heard. In the days that followed, Sarah couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. She sat in James's old workshop, staring at the tools he used, the wood he carved, the little projects he left half-finished. She picked up a small block of pine and saw initials carved into it. SB plus JB, their wedding day. She pressed it against her heart and sobbed. Lily didn't understand everything, but she knew her father was gone and that he had suffered. She asked questions Sarah couldn't answer. Why didn't they hear him? Why didn't Daddy wake up sooner? Why did they think he was dead? And Sarah didn't know how to reply, because she didn't know. Weeks passed, the town tried to move on, but Sarah couldn't. She kept thinking about that note. I'm still here. Why would James write that, instead of just calling her or sending a voice message? Why leave a note instead of calling for help? She went back to the phone and scrolled through the last videos again, and that's when she noticed something strange. The last few photos and clips were taken after James had supposedly died at 7:10 p.m., but the crash happened at 6:45. She blinked. That wasn't possible. She checked again. The timestamp said 7:10. She opened the last image. It was blurry, dark, but something was visible. A pale face, a figure standing in the woods, watching. Her stomach twisted. Had someone else been there? Sarah took the phone to Officer Rowley. He examined the photo. This looks like someone in the background, he said. Maybe a passerby? No one else was reported at the scene, she said. And this photo was taken after the crash, Officer. Rowley sat back slowly. You think someone found him in the woods? She nodded and left him there, or worse, helped bury him alive. The officer's face darkened. I think we need to reopen this case. They dug deeper. They found fresh footprints in the clearing too deep to be from James. They traced the phone signal. It had moved slightly between 6:45 and 7:30 p.m. James had walked or been dragged. They interviewed locals. A man who worked at a nearby gas station remembered something. A guy came in that night, he said, covered in dirt. Looked like he'd seen a ghost. What time? The officer asked. Right after 7. Do you remember his face? The man hesitated. I think it was Martin Blake. Sarah stared at the man. James's brother? The gas station attendant nodded. I'm not sure, but I think it was him. Sarah's heart sank. Could it be James's own brother? The one who stood so quietly at the funeral? The one who didn't cry? Had he been there that night? Had he watched James die? Sarah stood outside Martin Blake's small house on Willow Street, her fists clenched, her breath sharp. She hadn't spoken to him since the funeral, not more than a few polite words. Now, after what the gas station attendant said, she needed answers. The sun was going down, casting long shadows over the porch. A cold breeze rustled the trees as she knocked on the door. It opened slowly. Martin stood there in jeans and a gray hoodie, holding a beer. His eyes widened a little when he saw her, but he didn't smile. Sarah, he said, didn't expect you. She looked him in the eye. We need to talk. Martin stepped aside, letting her in. The house was messy. Pizza boxes on the counter, dirty boots near the couch. James's old fishing rod stood in the corner. Sarah stared at it for a moment. That used to be in our garage, Martin shrugged. He said I could take it months ago. She didn't argue. She sat on the edge of the couch. Martin sat across from her, resting the beer on his knee. Why were you near the highway that night? She asked. Martin didn't answer right away. Then he said, I wasn't. Someone saw you, she said firmly. At the gas station. After 7. Covered in dirt. He frowned. So, I work construction. I'm always dirty. You were there. He laughed, but it was hollow. You're grieving, Sarah. I get it. Looking for answers that aren't there. But James died in a crash. That's all. Sarah reached into her pocket. She pulled out the note. I found this in the woods near the road. With his wallet, Martin stared at it. Then his face changed. His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped. Sarah's voice turned sharp. He wasn't dead. When they found him, he was breathing. He woke up in the coffin. He tried to escape. Martin's fingers curled into fists. and then he broke. He leaned forward, buried his face in his hands, and let out a long, shaky breath. I didn't know what to do, he whispered. Sarah's heart stopped. What do you mean? She asked quietly. I was driving home from work, he said, his voice rough. I saw James's truck in the ditch. No lights, no movement. I pulled over. I walked into the woods. He looked up at her. He was lying there, not in the truck, on the ground, breathing shallow, whispering. Sarah's breath caught. What did he say? Martin's lips trembled. He said, "Don't leave me." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. And you did, she said. Martin stood up and started pacing. He looked dead, Sarah. His head was bleeding, his eyes barely open. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. You left him, she whispered. You let them take his body. He nodded. I didn't tell anyone I saw him. Didn't want to get blamed. I figured he would die anyway. You figured, she repeated. You figured it was easier to let them bury your brother alive than speak up. Martin turned to her, tears falling now. I made a mistake. The worst one I'll ever make. You let your own brother die in the dark. Martin dropped to his knees, sobbing. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. But she didn't forgive him. She stood up, took the note back, and said, You're going to the police. Officer Rowley listened quietly as Martin confessed. He recorded everything. The DA's office quickly decided to press charges: criminal negligence, obstruction, and more. Martin was arrested. The town was stunned. James Blake's story became even darker, not just a tragic mistake, but a betrayal, a life that could have been saved stolen by fear and silence. The days that followed were filled with media attention. The town of Maple Heights didn't feel the same anymore. People whispered when Sarah walked past. Some said she was brave. Others said she should have let it go, but Sarah didn't care. She visited James's grave every day, and now it was empty. After the exhumation, she had James cremated and kept his ashes in a small wooden box he once made with his own hands. On the box, she carved the words he tried to say, I'm still here. Lily began to have fewer nightmares. She would sit near the window in the evening, watching the sky. Do you think Daddy's watching us? She asked. Sarah smiled softly. I know he is. They sat together in the quiet for a while. Then Lily said, Maybe he's not cold anymore. Sarah hugged her tightly. No, baby. He's warm now. He's home. One night, Sarah returned to the woods, to the place where she found the wallet. She stood in the clearing, surrounded by tall trees and silence. Then she sat down and pulled out her notebook. She began to write everything, from the crash, to the dream, to the note, to the truth. She titled it, He Had an Accident and Was Buried Immediately. Not just for James, but for anyone who had ever been silenced, forgotten, buried before they were gone. And in the stillness, with the trees swaying around her, she whispered, I hear you, James. I'll always hear you. 6 months had passed since Sarah uncovered the truth. Maple Heights had changed. The cemetery where James was once buried now had a new plaque, a memorial stone placed by the town council in his honor. People came and left flowers. Strangers, sometimes visited, stood quietly for a few minutes, then walked away with solemn faces. It read, James Blake 19872025. He wasn't gone, we just didn't listen. Sarah visited every week, sometimes with Lily, sometimes alone. She'd sit beside the stone and speak out loud. She didn't care if anyone heard. I'm still trying to understand it, she'd say. How we move so fast in this world. How no one stops to check. Not even when it matters most. She brought her notebook too. She kept writing, not just about James anymore, but about others. Stories of people declared dead too soon. Stories of people no one believed. Stories of people who were forgotten before they were truly gone. She called the collection Buried Breathing. It would be published soon, but more than that, it became her mission to be a voice for those who couldn't speak anymore, to ask the questions others were too scared or too busy to ask. Lily was growing stronger too. the nightmares had faded. She started painting again, filling page after page with pictures of forests, birds, and little wooden chairs. One day, she painted a picture of a man walking through a field, holding hands with a little girl. "That's me and Daddy," she said proudly. "We're walking in heaven." Sarah didn't cry. She smiled, because somehow, she believed it too. Martin remained in jail awaiting trial. Sarah visited him only once, not for forgiveness, but for clarity. They sat across from each other, a thick glass wall between them. He picked up the phone. She picked up hers. He looked older, thinner. She didn't speak at first. He did. "I've had dreams," he said, "of him calling me, asking why." Sarah's lips trembled. "I didn't come here to make peace," she said. "I came to tell you that every second he suffered underground will live with me forever." Martin lowered his eyes. "But it will live with you worse." She stood and walked away. He didn't call after her. One afternoon, Sarah received a letter in the mail. It was from a woman in another state. The envelope was neat, the handwriting gentle. Inside was a short note. "I read your article online. My brother died in a similar way. No one believed me, but your story gave me strength. Thank you for speaking when the world stayed silent." Sarah pressed the letter to her chest, and she knew she had found her purpose: to raise awareness, to change how people viewed death, to slow things down, just long enough to be sure. By fall, her book was released. Bookstores displayed it in front windows. People called her brave. Some called her obsessed. But Sarah didn't care about praise or opinion. She cared about James. She cared about truth. During an interview on local TV, a reporter asked her, "Mrs. Blake, if you could say one thing to the world, what would it be?" She looked into the camera and answered without hesitation, "Listen. Before you bury someone, before you declare them gone, before you close the chapter, listen. Listen carefully, because they might still be whispering." Years later, when Lily was 16, she and Sarah took a trip to a quiet cabin in the woods. They walked through the trees together, laughing, breathing in the fresh air. Lily stopped near a clearing. "Is this it?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "This is where I found his wallet." Lily looked around and smiled. "It's beautiful, peaceful." Sarah knelt down and placed a small carving on the ground. It was a wooden bird, hand-carved, made by James years ago. "I want this to stay here," she whispered. "So he knows." "We remember." They stood together in silence for a long while. Then Sarah said, "He was lost for a moment, but not forever. We brought his voice back." Lily smiled and slipped her hand into her mother's. "Let's go home." And they did, together, walking toward the light, away from the silence, and forever holding on to the truth that saved them. Because James Blake didn't die that night on the road. He died when no one listened, and now people would listen forever. The end.